Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest TMA virtual briefing recapping the 2024 spring legislative session in Springfield and looking ahead to November's veto session. My name is Rich Carter. I'm TMA's government affairs consultant, and I'll be the moderator for today's briefing. We're joined by TMA state lobbyist David Curtin, as well as a very special guest, Senator Craig Wilcox of McHenry, who is a member of the Small and Midsized Manufacturers Caucus in the Illinois Senate. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning.
Great to have you. Well, we're going to spend the next half hour digging into the details of the spring legislative session and the outcome of key legislation and its impact on TMA members. Now I'll turn it over to TMA state lobbyist David Curtin, who will introduce our special guest. At the end of the program, TMA members will have an opportunity to ask written questions of Senator Wilcox by typing them into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. David, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks. Welcome, Senator Wilcox.
Thank you. It's great to be here with business leaders who understand what it takes to drive an economy.
Right. Very well said. Well, before we get into the legislative session that just ended in Springfield, can you give our viewers a little bit about your background and the district you serve?
Sure. I spent 24 years in the military,
Uh-huh.
being a program manager, systems engineer, and as close as I got to manufacturing there, we were acquiring new age communications equipment for our mobile forces and got to oversee the manufacturers and their processes that were building that. And then I spent the latter two-thirds of my career actually utilizing that equipment out in the field and unfortunately in some combat zones.
Wow.
But when I got out of the military and moved to Illinois, when I was figuring out what to do next, I have a funny story. We have a lot of plastic injection mold manufacturers here in the district, and did an interview where I thought I was looking to be a systems engineer for manufacturing expansion of the floor. And when I got into the interviewing process, it was obvious I was being interviewed for a help desk technician position. So that was interesting. But now my wife and I own a few businesses on the Woodstock Square where we do a level of manufacturing, and got back to my aspect, no matter whether you're doing low level, low tech or high tech manufacturing, it's all about processes where you're handling inputs and then doing a value add structure and outputs with quality management. And all of that is processing and systems engineering and human factors engineering. And that's kind of what I grew up doing.
That's good.
As for the district, it's District 32, basically the eastern half of McHenry County now, and the northwest corner of Lake County. So Collier County, but as rural as you can get for Collier County areas.
That's good. The General Assembly, it seems like a long time ago, but they adjourned at the end of May, and they passed a $53 billion budget, which was a $1.2 billion increase over last year. But you have the unique position of sitting on the Senate Appropriations Committee. And can you summarize this budget a little bit and walk us through who are the winners and losers of this session or budget?
Unfortunately, when you're in the sixth year of someone's term and they've increased our budget 32% or over 13 billion in that time frame, unfortunately, it's businesses and taxpayers who ultimately end up bearing the brunt of it. So if we want to call them losers, it makes that business and the aspect of living in Illinois daily a challenge, right? We're going to go through another gas tax hike where there'll be no legislative vote on it because we've tied everything to inflation, except when it comes to the important things for residents, senior freeze, other aspects that require a level of income seem to never get that COLA or cost of inflation adjustment. But when it comes to revenue, we certainly put that in. Certainly, the governor is spending significantly on what his party's priorities are, and that includes a lot of support, over $1 billion for illegal immigrants or aliens to Illinois, the sanctuary city structure. But developmentally disabled, special ed students, transportation, Surprisingly, the Prisoner Review Board got significant cuts. Soil and water conservation took a huge cut. But yet we talk about being green and caring about the environment and our water quality, our air quality. That was difficult. And so from that overall assessment, from my perspective, those aren't the priorities that I hear about when I'm out in my district. But that's where Illinois is going to continue to spend additional revenue off the backs of taxpayers and businesses.
Okay. Well, were there any bright spots for small and mid-sized manufacturers in this year's budget or this year's session? I know a lot of our members were happy that they had the reform of the Biometric Information Privacy Act, some reform, not as strong as we wanted, certainly. But were there any bright spots otherwise for what would you say for this session as far as small and
Sure.
mid-sized manufacturers?
I mean, the BIPA was certainly one. That was a bill I was able to support, but I don't think it went as far as many people really wish. It seemed like the legislative language really only addressed the court rulings and the fact that each incident wasn't finable. It was in substantiation of a type of thing, and that came from biometrics of a thumb for people doing clock in, clock out easier. And the reality is, we get into that legislative language and we're arguing about things that really kind of veer away from the intent. And the intent was to protect biometric privacy, not to be a hammer on businesses who found a way, often with employee acceptance, that makes things a little easier, right? That's systems engineering processing. How do we get a more standard process that is effective and efficient? And unfortunately, the way we're treating this is a harsh aspect of trying to be technology enabled and
Mhm.
advance both the work environment for members and create standard processes. So that was one bright spot. I think the other one for mid and medium-sized manufacturers is going to be the R&D tax credits that was set to expire. That's extended for another 5 years, but that probably is a smaller subset of your members. But those that are on cutting edge in research or development of new technology or incorporation of new technology through expansion or growth, those credits will come in as a factor. The question is, in this economy, will your members be bold enough to be looking at growth and expansion given the regulatory outlay and
Mm.
structure in Illinois? And that's always the question: is at what point do we come to a tipping point where more of our manufacturers are finding themselves elsewhere outside of Illinois as opposed to growing here, or manufacturers looking to come here? And that's the biggest concern
Yeah.
when we're looking for those bright spots.
Yeah, well, that's probably the next question is, were there any issues you were hoping they would address this General Assembly? And I'm sure the regulatory uh, aspects of manufacturing that are pretty burdensome might have been some, but can you address some of the issues that you were hoping they would address, or uh,
Yeah, so I mean, some of the areas it doesn't look like we did much to incentivize new job creation or that growth or expansion in this manufacturing sector.
okay.
Um, the dollars being spent to try and entice data acquisition or new technology hubs can be beneficial, but those dollar outlays seem to really be focused on bringing in a major corporation. And Goshen is one that we kind of look at and say, was that really the incentive that the state should be looking at? Can we do it on a more broad brushed aspect? Right? It's
Mm,
one thing to bring in someone who's promising a few hundred or 1,000 new jobs, but when you skip out on helping those who are creating 20 to 50 jobs in local municipalities, that's a big impact at a local level that we
mm,
seem to have skipped over. Um, the other one, it may be surprising for you to hear me say this, but I don't think labor really won in this. And I don't necessarily mean labor with the union structure, but labor in general. Um, I've had a chance to tour a number of manufacturers in the district, and I think the view or the perception of what manufacturing is stuck in the early days of the Industrial Revolution.
Uh,
And you walk some of these manufacturing floors and you're talking clean, well lit, not as noisy as you might think, right? It's not
right,
ironworks and things.
right.
But we didn't do anything to kind of embolden or incentivize that part of the sector. And I don't know if I expect some of that in veto, but certainly looking forward to having those discussions to put Illinois kind of on a path to focus on where the economy does grow and where a major percentage of labor and work exists.
Yeah. And I was just touring a plant, a TMA member, the other day in Chicago, where their main issue is trying to find good um, workforce development. But people back in the day, they could find somebody. It was somebody's uncle's nephew or something like that. But today they have to go out and they have a whole team trying to search for people in the high schools and the community colleges and kind of advertise to them. What should be like the manufacturing is not like it was back in the day. It's you can actually rise through the ranks, earn a very good income, and work in a great environment. So they were pointing out to me some of those issues, and I think that perception problem uh, is probably still there as far as manufacturing goes. Do you think?
I
Um,
think so. The reality is you're talking some very high skill requirements. The working conditions are significantly different than where we used to be. Um, the number of people that enjoy math, science, right? We have all these STEM and STEAM programs from middle schools on up. Um, that's actively sought after by our manufacturers and required there, whether you're doing that systems level processing, just the nature of the manufacturing equipment requires a whole different level of expertise. And I think that that's something that is a challenge to figure out how to get that next generation
yeah,
excited about and understanding that it's a viable career path without a doubt.
yeah. And the way it's explained to me is like what they don't know is what they don't know. If they were exposed to it, they would find out. A lot of them would pursue that path because it's a great career path for a solid career path for someone.
Maybe all these incentives to Hollywood to film movies here, maybe we'll find that somewhere down the line, today's age manufacturing becomes a semblance of a set or a theme in some movies.
There you go. There you go. Well, let's see. It's a long ways away, but you've got a fall veto session coming up after the election, which is in November. Can you get your crystal ball, and is there anything you'd like to expect to see in the veto session that might interest our members legislation wise?
There's lots that I'd like to see. Workers' comp reform, some taxation assessment, uh, discussion of property tax reliance. I think I was reading on the website some of the inability to feel like manufacturing property is treated like all others, specifically in Cook County, I think was referenced. Um, Unfortunately, I think Illinois enjoys the structure we have where municipalities have that reliance on property tax because it doesn't require tough votes in Springfield.
Hmm.
And so whether it's the failure of Illinois to be the major supplier of funds for education or avoiding kind of pension reform or other structures to get our General Assembly General Revenue Fund in order and eliminate that reliance on property taxes, it's too easy to push to the local level. The prime example this year was the repeal of the grocery tax, turned around by giving the locals the ability to reinstitute it when the governor removes it, not until 2026. But when your governor's looking for political win-wins and not looking for the benefit of the Illinois residents or its businesses, that becomes a challenge. And now, remember, veto session will be shortly after the election. So all of a sudden, election results will be kind of done. And I fear what may come in veto session, because there were some bills that really surprised us that were even filed this year pre-election that kind of sat on the burner. And the question will be, do those types of bills come back in veto post-election?
Mm-hmm. Well, we shall see, as the blind man says. Before we throw it back to Rich for questions from our TMA members, is there anything you'd like to predict or talk about as far as the upcoming elections? Are there any thoughts about the upcoming elections in Illinois, at least?
Well, I don't know if it's prediction or hope, but for me, seeing turnout increase, I think is critical. We go through, certainly in off-cycle elections, 12, 15, 17% voter turnout. And yet when you talk to residents and businesses, everyone's aware of the environment in Illinois, but to see that kind of turnout. So my prediction, caveated hope, is for significant turnout and involvement come this election cycle. I think that's kind of key. And, remembering that Illinois is maybe only a 55-45 state when it comes to blue-red, but when you look at the numbers in the General Assembly, that's the unfortunate aspect of how we handle our maps and our redistricting. Interested to see how Chicago handles their elected school boards. All of that kind of rolls in, where I just hope that more registered voters get in, whether it's excited or just involved. That's my hope.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I agree. We'll throw it back to Rich, and he has a few questions from TMA members who have been chatting in the typing in the chat box. Questions to ask you while we've been talking. So, Rich, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks, David. As David mentioned, now it's time for questions and answers with TMA members. For those of you on your computers, or if you're using a mobile app, you can type your questions, submit it through the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. I'll read the questions and ask Senator Wilcox to answer them. In the meantime, I'll ask Senator Wilcox the first question that was submitted by a TMA member. Question is, Senator, I can't imagine how difficult your job is dealing with all the politicians in Springfield. How are you able to get anything done as a member of the super minority party? What's your strategy, Senator?
The one misnomer, often because of what the news cycle tends to cover, the majority of bills down in Springfield really do go through what I'll call an honest democracy process, where we're having debates. Our side often seems to be bringing up challenges with either the language or the intent. And oftentimes we'll see that bill come back modified and edited to address some of those concerns. So from that perspective, 85% of the bills feel like they're a bit bipartisan. The challenge from the super minority structure is when we have a bill that deals on truly one of the ideological lines, where no matter how persuasive your arguments may be, the language may not change on that bill. That's the rub of being down there and the way Illinois controls the rules. My hope in all politics is a pendulum. So at some point, whether it's myself or others in my party, may be back into a more beneficial ratio, or maybe even the majority at some point. And I often talk about that'll be the true test of our party's commitment to being open and transparent with government. And will we adopt rules like, if I have a bill and I'm able to get a chief co-sponsor off the other side of the aisle, that should be an easy one to understand. That guarantees you a committee hearing and at a minimum a vote in a committee, maybe not calling on the floor, but the way our rules are set up, it's one person kind of controls really what comes out of rules or comes out of assignments and actually gets a public debate.
Yeah.
Thanks, Senator. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please type your question on the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. All right, we have another question from a TMA member. The question is, another state budget and another billion-dollar tax hike on the business community. How can business owners convince Springfield politicians to stop using us as their piggy bank to fund their latest spending priorities? Senator?
Yeah, so that does become the challenge. And I love that you use the word piggy bank, because I think there is a perception that if you're a business owner, that you're in this 1% of the population with expendable cash and just living a big lifestyle. Um, for small, mid-sized manufacturers, for small independent retailers, I can tell you that those who build up businesses, those first 5 years, and we know that's when many go under, that's blood, sweat, tears. It's full family involvement. I mean, it's 16, 18, 20-hour days. You come in the morning with a set plan of what you're going to do, and the first phone call or the first issue on the manufacturing floor can completely change that entire aspect. And it becomes a challenge if you look at what the background is of members of the General Assembly or in the executive branch. It doesn't seem like enough come from that ilk of growing business, employing others. And I think that kind of becomes the challenge, or the goal is that maybe we find more business leaders who think about coming into politics and treat it like George Washington, right? Come in for a couple terms, back to doing your duty, whether it's, we had Governor Farmer that really was how our founders grew up. And then you go back and you work the family farm after doing your time. But I think it's that experience level. And in Illinois, if you come from local government, a lawyer, those seem to be the pathways to the General Assembly if you just take a look at the biographies. And maybe it's time to find some local leaders that are willing to step up into state level roles.
Good point.
Thanks, Senator. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. All right, we have another question from a TMA member. I think this is a follow-up to something you mentioned earlier, Senator. Question is, 67% of our TMA membership recently said they're concerned about the Chinese-owned Goshen plant coming to Manteno. Are you concerned about what that means for Illinois and what is being said about it in Springfield? Senator?
Oh, I'm absolutely concerned. I mean, not to just mention the potential or the alleged CCP ties of this company. We have a concern, and as a military guy, I don't mind foreign investment in America or in Illinois, but when that foreign investment seems to be overly focused on very strategic either industry sectors or land sector areas, right? We could talk the same about the ownership of many of our farm fields.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes a concern because you don't want to be putting foreign nations or foreign businesses either in control of sectors that are sensitive, having that ultimately overbearing influence on a local structure. So that level of concern hits me from a national security perspective. I don't know if it's a local law enforcement perspective, but the reality is we have a very integrated global market. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So we just have to acknowledge and understand where concerns need to be mitigated and then where free flow of economy and trade can be open. But maybe we'll learn a little bit tonight, a couple different views of what that global market seems to look like. And, it's easy to decide to become a protectionist for American industry. But sometimes that global competition can foster innovation and new development, right? We don't want to be protectionist over stale sectors. We want to see competition drive that innovation and rebuild or regrow new sectors and reinvigorate old sectors.
Thanks, Senator. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, type it on the Q&A tab on the Zoom control panel. This is kind of another follow-up to a similar answer you gave, but it's more, I think, trying to get into the mindset of the folks in Springfield about why they give. It says, why do we always give huge tax incentives to bribe out-of-state companies to come to Illinois and set up shop, but we do nothing to help retain companies who have been here creating jobs for decades?
Yeah,
Senator?
I think that's an acknowledgement that one, if you take for granted those who've helped build your economy and employ your workforce in the past, you put into their minds maybe there are greener pastures elsewhere. So that retention or that incentivized to grow local, I think, is being missed by Springfield significantly. And at some point, maybe the hurt of those who have already left Illinois has Springfield thinking that you've got to do something big and bring something new in to replace those that you've unfortunately pushed or allowed to seek better futures. And yeah, that's a misplaced priority in my mind down in Springfield. And maybe that's a matter of getting more legislators out doing tours of business and understanding what does drive the local economy. Where does that local dollar earned in manufacturing get spent? Right around every manufacturing sector, you have retail, you have food services. Right, that prime employer becomes critical. And right now, from a structure of municipalities, Illinois does nothing to incentivize our local electeds to think 5, 10 years in the future and talk about we have a vacancy or an open land. Let's seek out a prime employer. The incentive is for them to chase that sales tax dollar. The number of gas stations and retail establishments that turn over so quickly, gaming, that's how Illinois seems to incentivize the locals, and that's not how you build a strong local economic base.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Senator. All right, I think we have time for one last question, and it is, Senator, looking ahead to next year, do you think anything can get done on a bipartisan basis to help the business community? Senator?
I would like to think so. And it's the work that TMA does to highlight the importance of manufacturing to legislators. Small and medium-sized caucus, maybe there's some work there for the SaMM's group to kind of focus on. Starting, post any election, there tends to seem to be a new opportunity, right? I expect some new faces. Despite no term limits, we do see significant turnover in both the House and the Senate. When you have new faces, every chance you get to introduce yourselves, talk about what matters in your district, ask them what matters in their district, and then ask them pointed questions. Well, how big is manufacturing in your area? What are some of your notable manufacturers' names? And just asking that type of question, if they know it, that's awesome. You have an ally. And if they don't, you're hoping to kind of spur them to learn that district, right? You get a new face, they've been elected by residents, not necessarily by what drives their economy, but they need to understand that part. So that would be kind of a focus area for us, as those new faces come into the General Assembly.
Great. Thanks, Senator. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but Senator, before we leave, do you have any closing thoughts for TMA members?
No, I just keep doing what you're doing. Know that no matter where you are, there's always advances you can be looking for. And those that are in your manufacturing suite on the floor doing that work, they're some of your best innovators when you get to talk to them because they're living that process every day. Simple talk of where are you wasting your time, or where do we have a process that asks you to do something repetitively when it could be done in sequence? They're the ones that will help you take those enhancements and advancements to the next level. And ultimately, they're the lifeblood of your company. So make sure you're talking to them all the time.
Well, thank you, Senator. Again, I want to thank Senator Craig Wilcox for joining us today, along with TMA State Lobbyist David Curtin for leading a wonderful discussion. And of course, we want to thank all of our TMA members who took time out of their day to join us today. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day and goodbye.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Dave. And thank you to all the TMA members. Continue doing what you're doing because Illinois needs you, whether we show it or not.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Senator. Have a
Have a
great
good
day,
day.
everyone.